Okay, thanks for having, Al, thank you very much, and Louisa, thank you for having us. This is a fun panel because I can tell you from the pre-call we had, I literally only had to throw 1 or 2 grenades and the whole thing went off. So can I just introduce, in terms of the representation on the panel, Steffen Fries, MHS Aviation, who will be speaking from the operator's perspective, and then Marie-Laure and Sarah will be talking about tripartite agreements from the financier's perspective. The general question, do tripartite agreements share risk fairly? I think to kick off the conversation, it's probably best to ask each of you in turn to answer that question to begin with. Do you think you're treated fairly, Steffen?
No. No, it doesn't. Good afternoon, first of all. I think they are absolutely designed and created to the security of the lessor rather than the operator. I mean, with all the assignments, I remember in one tripartite agreement, we were even asked to assign the management deposit at the end, where we said this can't be, and the owner stepped in and said, no, this can't be. So I don't say that all of them are not fairly created, but most of all, it's for your benefit from the bank.
Marie-Laure?
I think assigning the deposit is not a standard practice, so maybe we can have a carve-out on that. I think we need to go one step back. The purpose of the tripartite agreement is not really to benefit to the bank or to benefit to the operator. This is just to create a link between the bank, which is financing an aircraft under the operational control of another party, which is the operator, and the operator which is managing an aircraft in which the bank has an interest. I mean, most of the time the operator subscribes insurances which are also benefiting to the bank. So there is a clear link between the two parties, and this is the tripartite agreement. Most of the time the client repays a loan and the bank manages the financing part, and the client pays the operator for managing and operating the aircraft, and this is fine. So the purpose of the tripartite agreement is really to deal with one situation, which is what happens when there is a default. And in that case, it's very important to be sure that the bank is not left alone, meaning without the cooperation of the operator, and the operator is also protected against the fact that the bank doesn't pay properly the service that are requested. So I think it's very important to have a good lawyer to draft the tripartite agreement and to make sure that both parties are cooperating properly in any difficult situation.
So, exactly right. Sarah, in terms of the deposit, because I think it's probably fair to say that the industry has moved on significantly in terms of what tripartite agreements look like now, as opposed to, say, 10 years ago. There are still financiers out there, no doubt, who try to take the operator's deposit as part of the default. So on a default scenario, can we please have your operating deposit? Without asking you what the UBS position is, I'll ask you what the UBS position is. But what's your perspective on whether or not there should be a land grab on deposits?
Sure. Actually, can I just say that I really like this ratio today that we have? I think it's one of the few times that we have a panel where it's mostly women, but just saying. In regards to the deposit, I mean, as what we discussed before, I mean, at the point of, even if we get the assignment of the deposit, when it actually comes to practicality, is there anything left at the end of it? Because whenever there is a default scenario, even if it's with the bank or with the operator, by the time it gets to the operator, I mean, that deposit's already gone, I would assume. Because then the client has already run up the bills with the operator, so there's nothing left. So even if it were assigned, I don't think that we would see it in the end.
Except that you'd be creating some kind of legal risk or responsibility on Steffen in terms of how he spends that deposit. Talk us through your objection to the actual deposit being part of the security, Steffen, apart from the unfairness of it. But
I think it's a little bit like in the panel before, where it was said the operator comes in far too late in this project. If it's a first-time buyer, we speak to the lessor, to the bank, once the aircraft is signed and everything is ready. So there is almost no choice from an operator perspective saying, I do not accept this or that clause, because the bank, the bank is in a stronger position. The benefit when you sit at the desk or at the table with a bank talking about a tripartite agreement, you're already accepted by the bank, which is good from an operator perspective. So yes, you can get the aircraft. However, you might have to accept one or the other risk which you're not willing to take as an operator. You have to keep in mind, an operator, we do not have big legal departments. We do not have a risk department of hundreds of people like a UBS or a Bank of America. So for us, every tripartite agreement, because they're not standardized, is a new project, a very intense project to run through. And this is where it makes it complicated for us compared to you, where I know when we discussed it last week, you said you're flexible on some points, but the main topics of your tripartite agreements are more or less fixed.
So let's talk about standardization then. Why are they not standardized?
I would love to have them standardized, or more, let's say.
No, I think it cannot be standardized because it has to mirror the management agreement, which is very unique and tailored to each client, depending on the jurisdiction and the aircraft and the ownership structure, the operational structure as well, whether there is a lease or just a management a contract with the client. So it's very difficult to standardize. But the key parts are more or less always the same, I think.
So I guess for the lawyers in the room, I'll just protect us here. The agreements can't look the exact same for each for exactly that reason, but the principles could be standardized. So we could have a principle for Steffen of, we won't take your deposit as a financier because we see that that was your money.
For example, or kind of a waterfall principle that at the end, what you just said, Sarah, if there is something left and the UBO is also in default with us, that what's left over is somehow split fairly also with the operator in case of default.
That's the thing about risk, is that maybe every bank would calculate risk a little bit differently, and when it comes down to the deposit, maybe that's part of their risk program or how they assess it. So maybe one bank would ask for it, another bank may not.
I think the only reason why there could be an assignment of the deposit is that the bank may wish to be aware, to be informed in case his deposit disappear, which would be a good point, a good early signal. But otherwise, I don't think the bank has any right over this deposit. This belongs to the client.
They shouldn't do. But to be fair, Steffen, we've all seen circumstances where the operator has allowed the bills to rack up quite significantly, I mean, to the tune of 1 million, 2 million. What do you think in terms of trying to assess and balance the risk across the board? How do you think operators could do better on that front, just managing the exposure? Because it ultimately becomes an exposure for the bank.
I mean, it's all about, it's a lot about the operational deposit, what we have as an operator. But when it comes, for example, to aircraft refurbishment of a financed aircraft or a big overhaul, where you immediately can up in 2-3 million if there is a finding on an engine which is not covered due to corrosion, that we maybe bring in the lessor also, because today I sign it as the operator. I sign Mike Camo signs the 145 organization, and I'm liable for the payments. And if the owner does not pay, we try to find a solution with the bank, but the owner...
Why don't you just get them to pay in advance, though? I mean, how does this $1 million risk...
you can't pay it in advance. You sign a proposal for a 96 months inspection on a Challenger for, I don't know, $59,000, which is the quote, and you end up at 1.9 million suddenly because there are corrosion findings. So maybe to bring in the owner, the lessor at an earlier stage and sign that as well, so that the liability is not with me and the UBO, but also with the bank.
Probably would be a good way of addressing it, exactly. I mean, these tripartite agreements are really relationship agreements, because I see your perspective, Marie-Laure, where you're saying, well, it's, we use them on a default. The reality is, you three would have a working relationship, ideally would have an ongoing working relationship through the operation of the aircraft. so that it never comes to a drastic scenario like there's $1 million outstanding. I mean, I can imagine from a bank's perspective, hearing that the aircraft could be stuck in a facility with 1.2 million outstanding would concern a bank, to be perfectly fair to them, because if he doesn't pay for them to get their asset back out, they have to come up with the money. So isn't it more about sitting together in terms of standardizing? Isn't it more about how we communicate, well, what is fair? How do we make it fair? I mean, just short while ago it was at 100% in terms of is it fair on the operator? How would you even approach it? Let's get to a point where we are standardizing the principles at the very least. Let's get 3 principles here today. We've spoken about the operating deposit. Let's talk about the second principle, subordination. So Steffen's rights are subordinated to the financier's rights. Do you want to take that one, Sarah?
So I just wanted to back up a little bit, but in terms of the communication, right, when these bills start piling up, I mean, we ask the operator, and that's part of the tripartite agreement, that there's a form that they should fill out every quarter to let us know, the financier know, that if there are any bills that go outstanding to a significant amount, your deposit's already eaten up, and you have problems going to the client and asking for these bills to be paid. I mean, we are here to know at least, but then also to try and help you as well, to go to the clients and say, you know what, we need these bills paid, and we can help put a little bit of pressure in that respect, of course. But we always deal with the operator. In certain cases, we say, okay, can you handle it? Have you spoken to the client? And sometimes the operator said, you know what, we need your help. And then so we would step in and speak to the client and find a way to resolve it. And so quite a few times, the client and the operator ends up finding a payment plan over time. And we always follow up with both sides to make sure that these bills do get paid. So that's one way of keeping this open communication line.
Do you find they always tell you the truth? Because
No.
No. Niall Oliver on his speech was talking about, these operations are built on relationships and trust for many, many years. I'm not looking at you, Steffen, nor am I referring to Niall, just out of point of principle. But so once a quarter, you send out your note. What's the incentive for Steffen to tell on his relationship of 20 years with the UBO?
Well, it's to help him manage his risk as well. I mean, look, even if he says, yeah, we have a relationship, we got it under control, at least it's an indicator and we know of it, not that it pops up later down the road and nobody can do anything about it, and then we're in a very sticky situation. But at least if the operator says, okay, you know what, you don't have to do anything now, we got it under control, but then later on in 1 or 2 weeks, it's not under control, then of course we have to step in, at least to help out. But that's also to help manage their risk in a certain way, to try and put pressure on the client, to make sure that the client doesn't end up defaulting on either side.
Which brings me back to the subordination question, I guess, for you, Marie-Laure, because if Steffen's rights are subordinated to the financier's rights on a repossession or a default scenario, how do you think you can look after, well, start with the question of, should they be subordinated to your rights? And if so, why?
I think the subordination is a key aspect of the tripartite agreement. The main reason is that when the bank declares a default, when the client doesn't pay, if it's the operator or the bank can put pressure on the client to try to push him to solve the issue with the operator, and at a certain point of time, even if the client doesn't pay, let's say only the operator, but even more if the client doesn't pay the bank will enforce its securities. And at that time, the bank will instruct the operator to do what the bank needs to be done, mainly locating the aircraft, flying it to the safe jurisdiction, if needed, deregistering and exporting the aircraft and so on. So this is the entire process of enforcing the securities. At that time, the bank instructs the operator. So the bank should receive the money and will pay the operator for the work that has been done during this period of time. So it's let's say, normal that the rights of the operator be subordinated to that of the bank. The issue comes when, before enforcing the securities, the client is still supposed to instruct the operator, and at that time, the operator undertakes some work. I mean, maybe the aircraft is still flying, and the bank does not cover this cost. Is not supposed, is not obliged to cover this cost at the end of the process. So.
But you can see where Steffen's going to go with this one, though, because if there are banks out there that are still taking his operating deposit, and then there are banks out there that are saying, well, we, the bank, shouldn't have to cover these costs, aren't we putting the operator in too difficult a position with all of that?
I think I agree with Sarah. I mean, from a practical perspective, if there was still a deposit at that time, it would be used to cover the cost.
It's unlikely, though, isn't it? Because, I mean, we all know 3-month operating deposit is spent within the first month, at least.
And I think with the subordination, we give, as an operator, we give up our strongest asset, which is the aircraft, right? If someone is, let's say, in default or behind payment schedule, let's say, you know, we know it's not that easy grounding an aircraft from an operator perspective, but, you know, the release takes a little bit longer and the aircraft is sitting on the ramp, etc. The moment you have a tripartite agreement with subordination, where I have to inform at the first day of a default the bank, I need to help the bank to repossess the aircraft, etc. I do everything to give that asset out of my control. So my remaining powerful tool, you know, telling the owner to pay his invoice because otherwise he won't fly anymore, is gone.
But this, I guess, is where it becomes an interplay, really, in terms of the financial risk associated with that particular aircraft. Because if we were to agree a principle of, Steffen, sorry, but you probably have to be subordinated to, you will be anyway, because they'll have the first charge. But if we agree the principle of subordination, then what there should be in the standardised agreements is a waterfall clause that basically says, but don't worry, Steffen, if you're out of pocket, we'll look after you. The key is making sure that everybody is covered. And maybe that's a principle that could be a takeaway of there should be that type of clause in every tripartite.
I totally understand your position saying, you know, we as an operator have to manage the risk ourselves and look after the payments, you know, and the right amount of the deposit, etc. I just think we have to support the lessor as much as possible with the subordination and the assignments to get your asset back and most out of your asset. We have to treat this asset, you know, in the best way with the maintenance, with the storage, to do everything that you don't lose value on the aircraft. And this is what I would expect on the other side as well, to help the operator as much as possible if it's beyond our control, as I mentioned before, with any big findings on a maintenance or something, that we are not left behind.
Yes, but for sure, for the day when the bank instructs the operator to do so, I mean, to do the maintenance, to fly the aircraft, to do all the things that needs to be done in a repossession scenario, or these costs have to be covered by the bank. So they will be covered.
But that right there is not in every tripartite agreement. Definitely not.
So that's why we need good lawyers, and that's also very important for the operator to understand how it's going to work, and in this type of situation to have also either a legal department or a lawyer to review the clause and make sure the coordination is fair, because this is the way it should be. And honestly, I think the bank and the operator should have the same interest. I mean, they are serving the same client. They are looking after, they have an interest in the same asset, and the value of the asset is the main, is a very important thing for the bank, because this is the main security for the financing. And in a repossession scenario, I mean, we should also have an asset that retains enough value to cover the cost, to cover the outstanding amount for the bank, but also to cover the operating cost for the operator. So I think the interest should be aligned and well understood by both parties. This is not always the case, I do agree, but I think we also have to recognize that sometime before the repossession starts, or before the issue becomes obvious, the operator keeps flying the aircraft, hoping that the client will pay, and it not always materialize. Or sometimes hoping that at the end of the day, they will resell the aircraft and make money on the aircraft sale. And if there is a default on the bank side, this amount is not covered by the bank. And sometimes the bank is informed also very late, and it should not happen, that the client is extremely late on this payment. We have seen a case. I mean, this is not this is a good story, because at the end of the day, we managed to be paid. But the client was owing 2.5 million to the operator, and we were not even aware of that. And so after the resale of the aircraft, we tried to assist the operator and to see if we could cover these costs, although we were absolutely not obliged to do it. And we find out that there was a kind of side management agreement, and the amount was not due by the client, but by a third party. And so, yes, the operator had to suffer the loss, but it was absolutely impossible for the bank, from a legal perspective, to cover these costs. And so this gray area, before the bank enforces the securities, is, in my view, the most difficult part.
I mean, for this gray area, I just can recommend, and we had it once, to have really a good relationship from an operator also to the lessor. Because this is quite often forgotten. We look, as it was said before, we live from relationships, we live from referrals as an operator, but I have to say, when the relationship between the lessor and the operator is good, you have less problems. And this is also the case when it's not maybe a first-time buyer, if it's an existing customer with his second aircraft, or if it's a customer who has been with you for a long time and he has a sale and lease back, and you started an early point of discussions with the bank, it helps a lot to avoid all these misunderstandings at the end. The gray area is getting smaller and smaller the sooner you start to discuss.
That would be ideal.
But
I mean,
ideal,
other
but
than
once
having that battle every single time.
We had one coordination agreement. It was sent to us with the instruction to sign on 15 different pages out of 98, I think, the tripartite agreement. We have not even been called by the bank, and this aircraft.
I think that's half the problem, though, Steffen, isn't it? Is that the operators are brought in too late. There's no doubt about it in terms of the financings. One of the others, it's clearly a lawyer who wrote this, because this is a big bugbear. The last question: is it fair? This is for you now, Sarah. Is it fair that carefully negotiated positions in the operating agreement get superseded by banks' maintenance, insurance, and operational requirements? And can I add to that? Is it fair when they're superseded and you're not even given a copy of the loan agreement with the requirements in it? So you have to insist that they get added as a schedule to the back, and it all becomes this big, I would say, I'm not saying you guys do it because you don't, but absolutely unnecessary battle. Steffen has negotiated a management agreement with the client, so call it a refinance. You come and you say, Steffen, that's all very nice, and I can see what you've done commercially, but we have a very big long list of requirements from a bank's perspective. Could you please sign here too? And some of them don't even correlate to what he has already been doing all along. How do you guys approach that, or how much sympathy have you for an operator in that position?
Okay, well, I can't really comment specifically on his documentation and what the difference would be, because then we'd have to look at it in more detail. But, I mean, he can still operate the aircraft. I mean, however the agreement is with the client. And then, of course, it would only be superseded once the bank kicks in when it comes to a default scenario, right? So then, of course, our agreement would change in terms of managing the aircraft afterwards. So then, of course, the requirements would change. Right.
Well, technically, though, Steffen would be in breach of the contract with you. If he's carrying on, just say for argument's sake, there is a provision, an operational provision, that is different to what the bank is asking you to sign up to. Technically, you would be in breach to the bank if you didn't do it the bank's way.
Which becomes a problem if there is a case of default. Until that point, maybe no one might ask, but theoretically, I could not even sign that agreement. or I have to
So
go
how
to...
do you approach that then? Do you just say, I can't sign this agreement?
No, if there is a difference between the tripartite agreement and the management contract, we go back to the owner, to the UBO, and say, listen, this is a problem I cannot solve because I promised you this and you signed it and I signed it and the bank is expecting the other thing. And I think depending on the position from the owner to the bank, if it's strong enough, he might also change some expectations from the bank and not just in our management agreement. But the only one who could solve it is the owner.
Or he'll say to you, I need the money, Steffen, please just sign up. Yeah, I mean, this is where I suppose we do need to get to the standardizing. The top two questions, can I ask you this? In your opinion, do financing institutions view management companies as partners, helping with the security and possible repo of the asset? Do you view each other as partners? Anyone?
No, to me, the answer is clearly yes. Clearly yes.
The official BNP Paribas position.
No, it's not only official. I mean, I'm not an operator. I don't know anything in maintenance, and so they are clearly our best friends.
Actually, I wanted to bring up a point before. That's why my mind was still on it. But no, before, because Steffen, you mentioned something interesting, is that you obviously maintain the aircraft and you try to maintain its value as much as possible because the asset is basically what we're financing. And our risk that we manage is obviously different, right? And the bank takes a certain amount of risk. We do a lot of calculations. We highlight those as part of our risk management and how we finance the client. But to say that if the tables were turned, and let's say, well, you don't know how much that we actually lend to the client, but at the end of the day, it's up to us what kind of loan-to-value ratio we offer. So you only assume that we would have enough cushion, let's say, or left over that would cover your part. But let's say, what happens if the bank ends up lending 97% LTV, something crazy like that? We would never do it, okay? But just saying, because we have to manage the risk, and if we offer a high LTV and there's nothing left, can we come to you and say, can you cover us?
I think
no, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work, but I think that's a theoretical question. I remember last year we had a discussion, and I think it was about these days with a loan to value of 50%, and someone from a finance institution said, no, we would go even up to 80, borrow 80, and with 20% equity. So I think compared to a management deposit, you're on the safe side compared to an operator with your exposure. It's my view. I might be wrong, but...
Yes, but in a repossession scenario, we have to pay not only to cover the outstanding amount, but also to pay the legal fees.
Yes.
Which are entirely justified, just so we're all clear. Can I ask you, in today's world, so thanks, I'll go back to them, but in terms of today's world and the ever-changing perception of business aviation, mind you, it's not ever changing, it is pretty consistent, they all hate us, is what we're seeing an awful lot more of now is owners not wanting to be associated with the ownership of aircraft. And it's nothing to do with trying to hide their money, it's more to do with they're terrified that they're going to be lambasted by the Green Army. They're afraid about how it looks in front of the shareholders and corporates, etc., etc. One solution would be operator finance. Is that something that will ever come on your radar, either of you? So give Steffen the money and he'll put it out onto the market. The idea being so the person using it is, call it a block charterer. The money is still coming from him.
I think this question comes more from the airline environment. For business jets, it's a different story. The way we are doing it, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of Sarah, but it's not a secret. We are offering this type of financing with a wealth management angle, meaning that we are primarily financing our client and the assets of the wealth management client. So we are financing private individuals. We do not finance corporate. We have always a recourse on the beneficial owner who is a private client, private person. If we had to finance an operator, we would finance a corporate company, and there is not enough balance sheet to have a corporate guarantee, a meaningful corporate guarantee. So it means that we end up with pure asset-based financing, and this is not what we want to do.
But can't you take an assignment of his block charter agreement from the UBO and take that as part of your financial exposure?
Sorry?
If you took an assignment of his block charter agreement.
Charter, yes.
It's never guaranteed.
Well, it's just in terms of, I guess, back to the question really is, what is your view going forward? I mean, maybe this one is for you, Steffen, in terms of what the owners really want from you.
Back to your question, we have experienced over the last 2 years 2 customers who executed a sale and lease back, including a charterer in the it was more a 4-partite agreement at the end because it was the lessor, the lessee, and the charterer, which is the ultimate beneficial owner at the end. And this was indeed for the fact that he didn't want to be that visible anymore, because before it was not financed, and on the German register, I mean, it's not that difficult finding out who owns the aircraft. So we had either people moving onto the Austrian register for the fact that the operator is listed in the certificate of registration, or we had, as I mentioned, 2 sale and lease back. At the end, if it works out, to hide from the public, I don't know, but that was what the owner told us, the reason to go into a finance.
Let's talk about Austria, because I mean, this is definitely one of the benefits of working with a bank that knows the industry, because a lot of banks are afraid of Austria because technically you can't put a mortgage on. UBS, quite the opposite. You embrace Austria. What Austria gives is exactly what Steffen is saying, is the confidentiality, the anonymity, and the fact that you can take a pledge pretty much cures the whole security problem anyway. But it's I guess, knowing that kind of thing, knowing that if you put it with an Austrian, wherever, if there's Austrian operators in the room, now is your time to shine, by the way. But, you know, by putting it with an operator like that, that doesn't scare the bank, because that's the right thing to do for the client, and you still take your security, I guess.
The structure was always there, and it's up to our client and who advises them if this is a structure that should fit their need, which is if they kind of want to hide from the press or having illegal documentation saying that they own the aircraft or don't own the aircraft, then it was always there, hiding in plain sight. So it's just a matter of utilizing the structure or not for this reason.
Sarah, there was one interesting question on the slide before. Why is a tripartite agreement necessary at all? Which was asked from the audience. So you have...
It's a great question.
Yeah, but I think the basic answer is that...
For repossession in case of default?
No, just because we don't know you unless we have a tripartite agreement, and you have the operational control of the aircraft. So if we land to an airline, for example, that's very easy. The borrower, the owner of the aircraft, is also the operator. So that's very easy. We have only one party in front of us. But our client is the beneficial owner. Our client is a private person, and you have the control of his asset, which is our main security. So we need to have a legal connection between you and us, a legal contract. And this is absolutely necessary for any jet financing facility.
But just to stir the pot a little, couldn't you say the same thing about an aircraft that goes into 3-month check, 6-month check? You don't have a tripartite agreement with the maintenance facility, but yet you do have the risk, because not only does he no longer have operational control, they have possession.
That's true, but I think the order to the maintenance facility has been signed by the operator.
Not always.
So then it has been signed by the owner. So we have a contract with both. So whether it is the cost has to be paid first by the operator and reimbursed by the owner, or first by the owner, we have, there is an obligation for the owner to cover this cost towards the bank. So assuming that the maintenance or the C-check or whatever is not paid, the repossession process will start. and the owner will be ultimately liable for these costs.
I suppose, I mean, one thing you could do is ask Steffen, when we come back to agreeing what the principles could be on tripartite arrangements, is, Steffen, please will you sign these maintenance contracts?
Sounds a little bit like the operators are difficult, or we are not. So we do, as I said, the sooner we get into this discussion, the easier it is. And I have to say, we had have gone through one repossession 3 years ago. It was a good partnership together with a bank, and therefore, if I was asked, my wish list would be, get us in as early as possible. To have what you said before, the management contract and the tripartite agreement somehow aligned, which is difficult if you come in at a later stage.
Sarah, can I ask you to take this one? From your perspective, do you think would operators rather risk alienating their clients or the financiers? Depends on the operator, I guess, doesn't it?
I think so. I think it depends on the operator. I mean, I think they would rather risk alienating the financier. I think clients may be more important.
Do you think? Really? What do you think?
I don't know.
Neither of them.
Well, who's more scary?
I think what should be scary is to have bad reputation, and bad reputation comes when you do something wrong, when you stick to the rules, when you do things by the book, and you manage the situation in the best interest of the parties, including the client, because at the end of the day, for example, if there is a repossession, it's not always it can be also an amiable one with for the benefit of all parties, and at the end of the day there could be something left for the client. So, but when you try to play a funny game and in a not very transparent manner, I think then you can alienate everybody against you.
It's a short-lived win. I mean, I suppose it brings it back to the principle of a well-constructed tripartite agreement works for everybody, because Steffen, to the same token, you don't actually have to alienate either. You can just point to the contract and say, I have to comply with the contract. Sorry.
Yes and no. I mean, I think it depends on the customer. It depends on the situation. I think there is not a single right or wrong on that question, if customer or not, a client or not.
You'll just take it on a per-case basis. Understood. When the deposit is drawn by the operator to cover costs, does it trigger an event of default under the loan? It shouldn't do, but does it on yours? No. A good way to cover the operator interest. Not sure if I got that one correct. Whoever queried it, feel free to speak up. Can you go back to the other questions, Al? Sorry. Should banks insist that owners give the operator an operating? Should the banks insist that owners give the operator an operating deposit?
I would say no.
Really?
Well, insist, I mean, that's between...
If it's not in the contract already.
No, well, that's between the operator and the client, right?
So it's his deposit.
I think it also depends on the kind of management contract. For example, if you manage an aircraft where the operator keeps all the charter revenue and does 6 weeks later the balance and reimburses to the owner only an agreed hourly rate for cost of capital and insurance, for example, we are quite safe because the amount of 100 hours of charter is higher than a 1 month's deposit or 2 months deposit. But in general, I would say a bank should insist, because if there is no operating deposits, the case of default occurs at a very early stage.
Things get very serious very quickly, I guess, don't
they?
Yeah. Can I just talk to you for a second about Part NCC aircraft or private operations, where, say, the camo role is outsourced, but the flight department, the pilot, whatever, whoever is in charge. How do you feel about financing those kind of arrangements? And would you insist, for example, in those kind of scenarios, we'll give you the 40 million that you're looking for, but I really want you to go full management with Steffen here?
Maybe not with me, but with an operator was the question.
Yeah.
No, I know.
But I'm delighted.
Or another operator
I'm
in the
delighted
room.
if you call me or
I have nothing against
Alex
you.
or some of the other operators in here.
No, I think, how do we feel? First, we need not to make a mistake about the client and make sure that the client is dependable and we trust him. Second, it happens that the client gives the management of his aircraft to an operator which has an AOC, and even if the aircraft is operated purely private, is used purely private, the size of the operator, the experience, the licenses and everything, normal standard for the bank. I mean, this is an international one, well recognized and so on. So in that case, there is no issue. Now, if the client, at the other end, if the client wants to manage his aircraft with his own team, this is clearly not acceptable for the bank. And so, in the middle, if there is a very light structure, depends on the situation.
So what does the middle look like to you, though? Because presumably what you're worried about is who has possession of the asset at any given time, who has possession of the records. What does a middle ground, apart from full management, full operational control, which you have to have in an AOC, the other complete other extreme, and I've often wondered why banks are not more worried about it, the ones that do finance into pure private, is why are you not worried about that? Because that's a whole can of worms from a lawyer's perspective, because the operational control, even if you look at the contract, they're services agreements. They're not control of asset agreements, if you know what I mean. I mean, what's the UBS view on, or sorry, what's Sarah's view, sorry?
My view. Well, when it comes to private operation, I mean, we can accept it, but it depends on the client, right? That's taking a much riskier view on how the asset is obviously being maintained and controlled, right? So we have to assess that kind of risk, and then also we use a camo provider as well to try and
tripartite with the camo then?
Yes,
right.
yes, to make sure that the aircraft is maintained properly, so that we have a third party that's in that triangle at least, and then we make sure that the asset is being maintained accordingly.
I think the minimum, the absolute minimum, is to be sure that the people that are managing the aircraft on a daily basis are professional and they have some track record and everything. And the second condition would be to have an agreement with a camo.
And if we look at the reality for a complex aircraft above 5.7 tons, NCC operation is not that much different anymore from an AOC operation. You need the same structure, you need the same post-holder structure, you need to establish processes, you have your annual audits. The only difference is this is quite often a private operation or an internal corporate operation, which is then called NCC. But I must say there are NCC operators who take things, most of them, they handle it in the same way as we do with an AOC.
Yeah, it's less of a safety issue than people seem to think it is, for sure. Can we talk about then your worst case scenario, or in terms of, time is up. Okay, I'll quickly.
These are not over 15 minutes.
We're over by 15, are we? 1 minute.
Sorry.
Okay, quickly, to end on an anecdote then. What has been the worst repossession, if any?
No, I have already talked about that. I think discovering that the operator has signed a kind of side management agreement with somebody else who is not directly the client was not absolutely enthusiastic about that. But we managed the situation properly.
Steffen?
The worst scenario is, losing a customer for a tripartite conflict, let's say. That's bad for us.
Yeah, fair enough. Sarah?
Getting into war with the operator.
Stay friends. I think that's the
Stay friends, yes. We got to stay partners in such sticky situations. Yeah.
Excellent. We did talk about this standardizing tripartite agreements, and I've challenged the panel and challenged anybody in the audience is why not get a working group together and do that? So if anybody is interested in doing that, let's have a chat, because if we don't have to have these battles every time, that would be fantastic for the fixed fee lawyers. Thank you to my panel. Thank you all. Thanks for your
Thank you to you.